I always assumed the biggest secrets in my family were the harmless kind, the stories elders kept to themselves or memories too painful to revisit. I never imagined a secret could be big enough to change the course of my entire life. Yet the truth began cracking open on a quiet afternoon, in a way so unexpected that I still feel a chill every time I think about it. It started with a simple question from my grandfather, a man whose calm presence had always been the one constant in my chaotic world. A question that shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow did. I didn't understand the weight of it at first, or why his eyes lingered on me with a mixture of hope and something that looked strangely like guilt. That moment, so small, so ordinary, became the doorway to everything that followed. The revelations, the accusations, the betrayals buried deeper than I ever imagined. And the part that still haunts me is how easily my life could have continued without me ever knowing what had been stolen from me. Because what I uncovered wasn't just a hidden truth. It was a choice someone made about my future without my knowledge, without my consent. And once I realized who had kept me in the dark, I knew I couldn't walk away quietly. So ask yourself, what would you do if you discovered your entire life had been built on a lie meant to keep you obedient? Because I know exactly what I did. And it changed everything. Before everything unraveled, my life looked deceptively simple from the outside. I lived in a modest apartment on the edge of town, close enough to feel the pulse of the city, but far enough to keep some peace in my days. I worked at a small design firm, the kind where everyone knew everyone's coffee order and celebrated birthdays with cheap cake and louder laughter than necessary. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt stable, predictable, safe. Most mornings started the same way, sunlight slipping through the blinds, the smell of coffee drifting through my tiny kitchen, and the distant noise of traffic warming up for the day. I'd get dressed, tie my hair back, grab my bag, and step out into a world that felt familiar, even comforting. My routine wasn't extraordinary, but it grounded me. It gave me a sense of place. Family, however, was always a complicated part of my life. I grew up in a house where emotions were treated like fragile objects, kept on shelves, rarely touched, always dusted over with polite silence. My parents weren't cruel, they were just distant. Everything felt transactional, even affection. They loved order, structure, and reputation. And in their eyes, chaos, any chaos, was unacceptable. My grandfather was the exception. When I was little, he was the only one who saw me as more than a reflection of the family's expectations. He'd take me on quiet walks, pointing out the small things others ignored. The texture of tree bark, the pattern of clouds, the way people's eyes revealed stories they never spoke. Even when we drifted apart as I grew older, there was always a softness in the way he greeted me, as if he remembered some version of me I had forgotten. Still, our interactions were mostly holiday-limited, the kind you smile through even when something feels slightly off. My family moved like a machine, and I learned early on how to blend into the gears. But looking back, I can see the cracks that were already forming long before that afternoon with my grandfather. There were small moments, subtle, easy to dismiss. Times when conversations stopped abruptly as I walked into a room. Strange tension at family dinners, the kind covered up with forced politeness. My mother's nervous glances. My father's clipped tone whenever money or future plans were mentioned. The way documents were always whisked away as soon as I began to show curiosity. I chalked it up to their usual protectiveness or the generational differences we never addressed. I wasn't the kind of daughter who pried into family matters anyway. I tried to stay in my lane, build my own life, and keep my head down. It was easier than confronting the truth that something in our family had always felt incomplete. Still, despite the undercurrent of secrecy, I believed I understood my place in the world. I believed I knew what my family expected of me, what they thought of me, and what little role I played in their larger plans. I didn't imagine for a second that my entire life path had been quietly redirected without my awareness. Around that time, I'd been thinking a lot about my future, maybe applying for a higher position at work, maybe moving somewhere with a little more space. Dreams that felt small but meaningful. Dreams I thought were entirely mine to shape. I had no idea that someone else had already written a future for me. That afternoon with my grandfather didn't feel significant at first. It was supposed to be just another visit, another round of polite conversation, another attempt to bridge the emotional distance we'd all grown accustomed to. But the atmosphere felt different the moment I stepped inside his house. The air was heavier, thicker, as if something unspoken lingered between the walls. He looked at me in a way he hadn't in years, studying me, searching for something I didn't understand. And in that look, I felt the faint flicker of warning, though I couldn't name it. I didn't know that a single question from him would shatter the little certainty I had left. I didn't know that the truth he tried to nudge me toward had been hidden intentionally, deliberately, and cruelly. If I had, maybe I would have braced myself. But I didn't. I walked into that moment blind, unaware that everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself was about to be torn open. And the terrifying part? The betrayal didn't start that day. It had started long before I ever realized. I remember the exact moment the atmosphere shifted inside my grandfather's living room. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the faint tremor before an earthquake. I had been sitting across from him, noticing how unusually restless he seemed. His hands fidgeted with the edge of a newspaper, his breathing uneven in a way that made my stomach tighten. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and I felt it long before I understood it. That's when he asked the question that cracked open everything. He asked if I had gotten an email about a trust fund. The words didn't register at first. They drifted through the air slowly, as if coated in molasses, sticking to the edges of my mind but refusing to settle. A trust fund? Me? It didn't make sense. I had never been told about anything like that. No hint, no suggestion, not even a casual mention over the years. My family wasn't wealthy enough to have generational assets quietly waiting to be passed down, or so I had always believed. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe he misspoke. Maybe he meant something else, a newsletter, a family update, some harmless piece of information I had overlooked. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt a slow, icy dread spreading through my chest. My grandfather didn't misspeak. He was deliberate, careful, calculated. If he asked me that question, he meant it. By the time I drove home that evening, my mind was tangled. Every memory, every strange glance from my parents, every sudden hush at family gatherings came rushing back. Things that once felt insignificant now prickled with hidden meaning. I barely slept that night, lying awake with my eyes scanning shadows on the ceiling, replaying every moment that suddenly felt like a clue I had ignored. By morning, curiosity had twisted into unease. I decided to dig just a little. I wasn't expecting to find anything. Honestly, I thought I would laugh at myself for being paranoid. But the search became unsettling almost immediately. I typed my name into old email accounts I barely used anymore, digging through years of forgotten messages. I checked spam folders, promotions tabs, archived threads, anything that might hide something important. I told myself I was being ridiculous until I wasn't, because that's when I saw it. A single unread message, buried under months of junk mail, sent from a legal office I had never heard of. My heart lurched into my throat as I tapped it open, expecting some generic scam or a mistake. But the moment the text loaded, I felt my entire body go still. It wasn't a scam. It wasn't a mistake. It was real. The email was brief. Too brief for something so monumental. It merely confirmed that documents regarding my inheritance had been sent to my parents per their request, and that additional digital copies were available upon my acknowledgement. Inheritance. The word pulsed at me, sharp and electric. My parents' request. I felt heat rising at my neck as I read and reread the email. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Why would anything involving my inheritance be sent to my parents instead of me? Why would they have access to documents meant for my future? And what exactly had they received without telling me? A cold wave washed over me as a darker thought took shape, one I hadn't wanted to entertain but could no longer ignore. Maybe I wasn't meant to know. Maybe they had hidden it on purpose. I stared at the email, feeling the world tilt a little. My mind ran in frantic circles, trying to piece together the puzzle, but there were too many missing pieces. I needed more. I needed answers. And the only place to find them was at my parents' house. The next day felt like walking into a storm I wasn't prepared for. I drove there with my heart pounding, gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Their home looked the same as always. Perfectly trimmed hedges, polished windows catching sunlight, the familiar scent of old flowers drifting from the porch. But beneath the surface, everything felt eerie, hollow, wrong. Inside, the tension was immediate, thick enough to choke on. My parents moved with a strange stiffness, as though they sensed something had shifted. As though they knew the secrets they'd buried were close to being unearthed. I didn't ask any questions. Instead, I simply observed. I watched their faces, their hands, the way their bodies stiffened whenever I lingered too long near the office door. I noticed how my mother followed me with her eyes, watchful, wary, as though she feared I might stumble into something I wasn't supposed to see. And then it happened. While they were busy in the kitchen, I wandered into the office. It wasn't snooping, I told myself. Not really. I was just looking, just trying to make sense of the storm brewing in my mind. But the moment I stepped inside, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. Something was in here. Something important. And then I saw the drawer. Locked, but not fully. The latch hadn't clicked into place, leaving it open just enough for me to tug. I hesitated for only a moment before pulling it open. Inside were stacks of folders, financial records, legal envelopes, documents with embossed seals. My breath hitched. I reached for the topmost folder, and my hand trembled when I read the first page. My name, my date of birth, my grandfather's signature. A trust established years ago. Years. My stomach twisted violently as I flipped through the documents. The trust wasn't small. It wasn't symbolic. It was substantial. It could have changed my life. It could have eased burdens I had carried for so long. Student loans, rent struggles, years of scraping by. And they had known. They had known the entire time. My parents had been receiving updates, transfers, notifications, everything meant for me, and none of it had ever reached me. I sank into the chair, heart pounding, vision blurring. The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave, heavy and merciless. My throat tightened as I realized the truth. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't overlooked anything. They had kept it from me, deliberately. A slow, burning anger began rising inside me, simmering beneath my ribcage. It wasn't the kind of anger that made you scream or break things. It was the kind that settled deep, turning cold and focused. The kind that sharpened your mind rather than clouding it. As I continued reading, the story grew darker. There were letters from the attorneys expressing confusion about my lack of response. Reminders sent repeatedly to my parents. Notes indicating they had reassured the firm that I was aware and handling everything. Lies. Layer upon layer of lies. But the final blow came when I found a document tucked at the bottom of the pile, a statement showing funds moved. Allocations shifted. Withdrawals made, not by me. My breath caught in my throat. The money had been touched. Not completely drained, just small amounts here and there over the years. Enough that someone thought they could get away with it. Enough that someone believed I would never find out. And the signature authorizing those withdrawals. It wasn't mine. The room seemed to spin, and for a second I thought I might collapse. My parents had controlled my inheritance. Hidden it. I used it. Reshaped my life while pretending everything was normal. I felt my chest constrict with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Memories flooded me. Times I had struggled financially, times I had begged them for help, times they had told me to be more responsible, all while sitting on money that belonged to me. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had stolen years of my life. I stood up, trembling, the pages clutched in my hands. The betrayal wasn't a single moment. It was a timeline, a sequence of decisions made in rooms like this, behind closed doors, while they looked me in the eye and pretended everything was fine. I had thought I knew what family meant. I had thought loyalty was mutual, that blood offered at least some kind of safety. But at that moment, staring at the proof of their deception, I realized I had been naive, foolish even. Something inside me hardened. I didn't confront them, not yet. I couldn't. Not when I was shaking so violently. Not when my voice would have cracked under the weight of what I had discovered. Instead, I closed the drawer, left everything exactly as it was, and walked out of the room as quietly as I had entered. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel with numb fingers. Every streetlight seemed to flicker with accusation, every shadow whispering the truth I could no longer ignore. My family had chosen their comfort over my future, their control over my independence, their secrecy over my trust. And now they would learn what happened when someone like me, quiet, patient, overlooked, finally opened her eyes. Because I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. That night, as I sat alone in my dim apartment, the anger crystallized into something sharper, something clearer. Revenge wasn't a rage-fueled impulse. It was a plan, a deliberate unraveling of the web they had woven around me, a reclaiming of everything they had taken. They had hidden the truth.
But now?
Now I knew exactly where to strike, and I was just getting started. The day everything shifted, the day my revenge finally stepped out of the shadows, began with a stillness so unnatural it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. I woke before dawn, long before the sun crept over the horizon, my mind sharp and steady in a way it hadn't been since this nightmare began. Every step I took felt deliberate. Every breath felt earned. My hands no longer trembled with confusion or fear. They moved with purpose. Weeks of planning had led me here, weeks of gathering evidence, looping in the attorneys who thought I'd been ignoring them, and uncovering every document my parents hoped would remain buried. I had spent long nights under the dim glow of my laptop screen, piecing together financial timelines, tracing signatures, cross-checking dates and transactions until the full picture stood before me like a monument to their betrayal. And now, at last, everything was ready. My grandfather's birthday was the perfect stage, an event my parents couldn't avoid, surrounded by extended relatives who prided themselves on propriety. I knew this family. I knew their obsession with reputation, and I knew exactly how to wield it. When I arrived, their reactions confirmed everything. My mother stiffened, her eyes narrowing with unease. My father's jaw tightened, as if bracing for an impact he hadn't yet identified. I walked in calmly, the folder tucked neatly under my arm, my expression unreadable. Inside, my pulse pounded so violently I could feel it in my fingertips, but outwardly, I was composed, eerily so. The house buzzed with small talk and laughter, but beneath it all, I sensed an undercurrent of tension. I caught my parents watching me, whispering quietly to each other. They could feel the shift, even if they didn't understand it yet. When the moment came, it was quieter than I expected. My grandfather sat at the head of the table, his gentle eyes softening when he saw me take the empty seat across from my parents. Everyone had settled, plates full, glasses raised. My family moved through their usual rituals, the speeches, the perfunctory praise, the forced warmth. But I wasn't listening. I was waiting. Then, as the room began to relax, I placed the folder on the table. The sound was soft, almost delicate, but the effect immediate. My mother froze mid-sentence. My father's shoulders tensed. My grandfather's gaze flickered with something close to recognition, perhaps even dread. The conversations around us slowed, then faded altogether. It was as though the air thickened, pressing against all of us at once. Inside that folder was every document they tried to hide. Every statement, every email, every forged signature, and quiet withdrawal. It was a complete roadmap of their deception. And I slid it across the table toward my grandfather. He opened it with trembling hands, scanning the pages with growing horror. His face drained of color, his breath catching audibly. He understood immediately, far more quickly than my parents did. But when they finally realized what he was looking at, the panic in their eyes was unmistakable. They tried to mask it. They tried to maintain their composure. But their voices faltered, their hands shook, and for the first time in my life, I watched the facade they'd spent decades building begin to crumble. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth lay exposed on the table between us, undeniable and merciless. I let them sit with it. I let them feel the weight of every choice they had made. And then, in a measured, steady tone, I explained everything. I described how I found the email, how I uncovered the documents, how I traced every missing dollar, every lie, every stolen opportunity they never intended to return. I detailed the calls with the attorneys, the legal confirmations, the mounting evidence that they had intentionally kept me in the dark while shaping my life to suit their needs. Every word was a blade, and I watched each one sink in. My father's face grew paler with every detail. My mother's hands clenched the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. They tried to interject, to justify, to excuse, to spin the narrative, but I kept speaking, unwavering, until the entire room understood exactly what they had done. Until they understood exactly who they had wronged. The silence that followed felt cavernous. For the first time, I saw my parents as they truly were, not the distant figures of my childhood, not the authoritative voices I once tried to please, but deeply flawed people who had chosen greed and control over their own daughter. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was precise. Because just as the weight of their betrayal settled over the room, the attorneys I had invited walked in. Their presence was quiet yet seismic. Papers were laid out. Terms were explained. The legal consequences of what my parents had done were read aloud for the entire family to hear. No shouting. No theatrics. Just the cold, sharp truth. My parents sat frozen, their reputations, everything they cared about, cracking in real time. Their relatives stared at them with disbelief, judgment, and disgust. The murmurs grew into whispers, the whispers into full, unrestrained shock. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was accountability. This was every lie collapsing at once. As my parents absorbed the reality of what they were facing, reparations, investigations, the unraveling of control they had clung to for so long, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't a triumph. It was something deeper. Relief. For once, the truth wasn't hidden in locked drawers or whispered behind my back. It was out in the open where it belonged. My parents looked at me then, truly looked at me. Their eyes were full of something I had never seen directed my way. Fear. And it struck me how long I had lived in their shadow, believing I was powerless, believing they held all the cards. But now, standing firmly in the truth, I realized something that shook me to my core. They were never powerful. I was simply never allowed to see my own strength. As the room continued to churn with shock and questions, I stood, gathering the folder back into my hands. My grandfather stared at me with tears in his eyes, tears of regret, sorrow, or something more complicated. But I didn't linger on it. I had done what I came to do. I had taken back my voice, my future, my inheritance, my freedom. And as I turned to leave, my parents called after me, quietly, desperately, but I didn't look back. Because this was the moment everything changed. The moment they finally understood what losing me truly meant. The moment my revenge stopped being a plan and became a reality. And the moment I realized that the next decision I made would determine the rest of my life. The question was, now that I had exposed their world, what would I build with the ruins they left behind? When everything finally came crashing down, every truth exposed, every mask ripped off, I expected to feel triumphant. I expected that moment, the one I'd been obsessively chasing for weeks, maybe even years, to hit me like a wave of victory. But instead, when the dust settled, all I felt was stillness. A strange, unfamiliar quiet inside me, like the world had paused to let me breathe for the first time. After the confrontation, after the lies were broadcast to the people who once worshipped them, after they stood there speechless, while the walls of their carefully constructed life collapsed, I walked away. I thought that walking away would feel like floating. Instead, it felt like dragging chains behind me, chains I couldn't decide if I'd forged myself or inherited from the people who hurt me. In the hours that followed, I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I didn't even cry. I just replayed everything, scene by scene, like my mind didn't trust that it was really over. Maybe that's the thing no one tells you about getting justice. The adrenaline fades, but the echo stays. I remember sitting on my bed that night, still wearing the same clothes I had on when I confronted them. My hands were still trembling, maybe from the shock, maybe from the release. I stared at the evidence. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. And for a moment, I wondered what my life was supposed to look like now. Revenge had been the heartbeat of my every waking moment. Without it, the silence became loud. But as I sat there, the reality of what I'd done, what I had to do, started to unfold more clearly. People always look at revenge like it's a single moment, a final strike. But it's not. It's an unraveling of illusions, of loyalties, of the version of yourself you used to be. And once you pull that thread, even for the right reasons, you don't get to pretend nothing changed. The next morning was the first time I allowed myself to breathe in a different way. I woke up expecting fear, guilt, maybe even regret. But none of those showed up. Instead, what filled me was something lighter, still fragile, still unfamiliar, but real. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't peace. It was freedom, in its rawest form. I stepped outside, and for the first time in months, the world didn't feel heavy. I wasn't trying to hide my pain anymore. I wasn't carrying anyone else's sins on my shoulders. The storm that had followed me everywhere had finally passed, even if the sky wasn't completely clear yet. And that's when I realized something important. Revenge hadn't fixed me. It hadn't healed the deepest part of my wound. But it had stopped the bleeding. It had given me the space to finally start healing on my own terms. In the days that followed, people talked. Of course they did. When betrayal becomes public, everyone suddenly has an opinion. Some said I was brave. Others said I went too far. A few said I should have stayed silent, let karma do its job. But here's the truth I finally accepted. Karma doesn't move unless someone pushes it. And sometimes you have to be the one to push. I didn't seek revenge to destroy them. I sought revenge to rebuild myself. I wanted closure, not the kind people talk about like it's a neat little bow, but the kind you carve out for yourself when you realize no one is coming to save you. Eventually, the noise around my story died down. People moved on like they always do. The ones who once defended them began to see the truth. The ones who doubted me reached out with apologies I didn't need anymore. And the ones who watched from the sidelines learned a lesson they'd remember for a long time. But the most surprising part? I didn't feel anger anymore, not toward them, not toward the situation, not even toward myself. What I felt instead was power. A quiet, steady kind of power that doesn't need validation. Revenge didn't make me bitter. It woke me up. It taught me that sometimes the people who hurt you will never apologize. They will never admit what they did. They will never feel the guilt you wish they would. And waiting for that, hoping for it, is like waiting for fire to turn into water. It's never going to happen. So I stopped waiting. I started focusing on the parts of my life I'd abandoned while trying to survive. The hobbies I'd neglected. The friendships I'd unintentionally distanced. The dreams I'd put on hold because my energy went into fighting battles I didn't start. Reclaiming my life didn't happen all at once. Some days, the weight came back. Some nights, the memories still hurt. But slowly, I learned to live again, not as a wounded version of myself, but as someone who knew the value of her own strength. And as strange as it sounds, I'm grateful. Not for the betrayal, not for the pain, but for what it forced me to uncover about myself. I found resilience I didn't know I had. I found clarity I didn't think was possible. And most importantly, I found me. Now, when I think back to everything that happened, I don't see chaos. I see a path. A painful one, yes, but one that led me exactly where I needed to go. My revenge wasn't the end of the story. It was the turning point. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. Revenge doesn't end a chapter. It rewrites the entire book. And standing here now, with the final page of that story behind me, I realize something I wish I could tell every person listening who has ever been betrayed, broken, or pushed to their limit. Justice isn't always gentle. Healing isn't always quiet. And sometimes the only way to reclaim your power is to take back the narrative they tried to steal from you. So let me leave you with the question that continues to echo in my mind, long after the battle ended. When someone steals your peace, your trust, your sense of self, how far would you go to take it back?